We need to talk about ideas, good ones and bad ones. We need to learn stuff about the world. We need an honest, intelligent, thought-provoking, and entertaining review of what the hell happened on this planet in the last 7 days. We need to sit back and listen to the Iron Fist and the Velvet Glove.
Or on this occasion, just sit back and listen to the Iron Fist, because I'm running solo on this one, little solo rant, and the topic of conversation, of course, will be the attacks on Iran and the counterattacks by Iran. So I've got a lot of sort of commentary by other people that I want to get through, have a little rant of my own. So I just thought, I'll just do it on my own. Plus, I was traveling last night, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, you've just got me. I'm recording this, and I think I'll record the video as well and pop it onto YouTube. But in any event, this is the audio that's going to go out. So yeah. All right. Well, dear listener, the attacks. Really, it's not surprising, is it, that they did it? And I guess for me, the surprising or interesting part of it is not so much that they did it. There's just evil bastards in control of everything. It's more for me the good people who should know better, who are acquiescing to this this whole bombing campaign by the US and Israel. People like our own Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, who should know better. And that's the fascinating part, is how our society has reached the point where so many of our members are quite okay with a school full of little girls as being bombed for no good reason, and we're supporting the people who did the bombing. And how propaganda has twisted the minds of so many people so that their empathy is directed to the people who are causing the suffering rather than the victims. That's the fascinating manipulation of our society, I think, is the part that gets me. So what I thought I would do, I think a fair bit of this podcast is going to be on Anthony Albanese and just what he said and done. But for the sake of the record, we should just run through a few of the facts that are happening or have happened. So, look, an unprovoked attack by Israel and the USA on Iran, hundreds of Tomahawk missiles launched from US warships, while US stealth fighters and drones joined a reported 200 Israeli fighter jets in targeting 500 sites across Iran. The whole thing is called Operation Epic Fury. That alone is enough to just put them on the wrong side of history. These people they're just straight out of comic books, aren't they? Or Marvel superhero movies. The leaders of the free world have to name an operation like this, Epic Fury. They managed to kill a number of Iranian military and political leaders, including killing the supreme leader himself, and as well, at least 165 girls when their school was bombed and just wiped out a school of little girls. As a commentator said, which I'll refer to later, this is the Epstein class who are ruling us at the moment. If they're not raping little girls, then they're blowing them up. Anyway, Iran has mounted a pretty decent counterattack. And what they've been doing, as well as bombing Israel, Tel Aviv, is they've been targeting the dozens of US bases located in the neighbouring Gulf states and seem to have been relatively effective in doing it. So a number of the missiles and drones have managed to get through. Israel, of course, would call this exercising an inherent right to defend itself, where other people are incredulous that Iran would do such a thing. I'll get onto those comments later. So why did the US and Israel start this off? Well, they claim that Iran was about to launch an attack against Israel, but there's no credible evidence of that. They also sort of at different times have claimed a nuclear capacity by Iran was imminent, but it was only last year, after 12 days of bombing, that the US declared it had completely obliterated Iran's nuclear capacity. So they're either lying then or they're lying now, or lying both times. Anyway, at the time of the attacks, Iran's negotiators were engaged in talks with US Special Envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. This is the world we've got into. The poor Iranians having to deal with numbskulls like that. I mean, honestly, the US is just turning into a North Korea, isn't it? Where family members like Jared Kushner, with no experience or qualifications, are conducting negotiations like this in Geneva over the future of the Iranian nuclear program. So any calls now by people saying Iran should return to the negotiating table, Iran would say, we were at the negotiating table when you fuckers bombed us. And that also happened last year when you attacked us. In June last year, amid similar diplomatic efforts, that's when Israel attacked Iran at that time. So how can the West honestly say to the Iranians there should be a ceasefire and a return to negotiations? Because as far as the Iranians are concerned, negotiations are just an excuse to kick off a bombing campaign. Anyway, so it's kicked off. We expect craziness from the Americans. The sad, the worrying, the depressing aspect is the support that they've had from mostly other Western countries, in particular our own country of Australia, dear listener. But the most vociferous defenders are those that make up the Five Eyes intelligence network, UK, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. They've been the four that have been the most supportive and backing the aggression and justifying the action by Israel and the US by saying that Iran's been a source of instability and terrorism, and it was seeking nuclear weapons, and that it killed thousands of its own citizens during protests in January. So they're just bad guys. So fair enough to just bomb them, because that's what you do when you're Western imperialists. You just look around the globe conducting regime change when you don't like the particular regime. Anyway, for example, New Zealand Prime Minister, a statement that said, condemned in the strongest terms Iran's indiscriminate retaliatory attacks. From what I've seen, the Iranians are not trying to waste their bombs. They're trying as best they can to lob the bombs on US bases in these Gulf states. Let's face it, there's a fair number of them. There's plenty of places to. So they've been focused on the US bases. And from the Iranian point of view, fair enough, because that's where the bombs are coming from that are landing on their territory. These people who are criticising Iran have no capacity to empathise and put themselves in another country or person's position. Anyway, our own Albanese welcoming the attack, he repeated unsubstantiated claims made by ASIO that Iran was behind several attacks on Jewish property in Australia in 2024. That was part of his spiel for saying how evil the Iranians are. More about that later. Remember Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney? He's the guy who came out, I think, at Davos and basically said, this whole sort of colonialist rules-based order that we've been conducting has really just been favourable to white people, not to brown people, and it hasn't been fairly done, etc. And we all, some of us, would be thinking, wow, well, that guy sort of learned the lesson of history and recognises the evils of this imperialist sort of empire of the West led by the Americans. Yet the same guy has repeated the same formula of words about this Iranian attack, supporting what the Americans and the Israelis have done against Iran, calling Iran the principal source of instability and terror through the Middle East and backing Israel's right to defend itself. So you think a guy's got a bit of self-awareness? Nope. So he called out the hypocrisy of the neo-colonial nature of post-war rules-based order and then promptly backed it next time a significant event came along. Wow. European leaders, less supportive, but still evasive and disingenuous, keeping their criticism directed against Iran's defensive military response. Merz called the counterstrikes unjust and harsh, and EU Chief Foreign Policy diplomat Kaja Kallas condemned the Iranian regime's indiscriminate attacks against its neighbours, which she said carried, quote, the risk of dragging the region into a broader war. So for all these people, when Iran presumably has no nuclear capacity, no record of invading other countries, is at a negotiating table with Jared Kushner, previously had nuclear proliferation treaty with Obama, which was cancelled by Trump, which was not reignited and restructured by Biden, and then they're back at the negotiating table. When they're surrounded by US bases in Gulf states and they're bombed, killing school children and others, and their leader, they're not supposed to retaliate, just sit there and do nothing. I mean, the last time this happened last year, the Iranians did a very measured response when the US attacked their nuclear facility. They basically said, we're forced to retaliate in some way. We're going to bomb this side over here and this side over here. We're going to do it in a couple of hours. You better tell your people to get out of there because bombs are going to be heading there. So they actually warned them last time of what their retaliation would be. This time, fair enough, they've gone, fuck you. And they've just started bombing some of these other sites. Anyway, this, of course, is all part of the regime change playbook. That word regime, by the way, is thrown around all the time for the bad guys. And we really should be using it for someone like the US regime. It just connotes an idea of illegitimate tyrant dictator going around killing people. And that could apply to a lot of other countries as well. But anyway, we've been softened up in the West. Stories of a simplistic narrative of good versus evil, authoritarian versus liberal democracy, Iranians killing street protesters by, the tens of thousands. Of course, no mention of that being orchestrated by Mossad and the CIA who openly admit that that's what they're doing, that we've got agents on the ground. That was all covered in a previous episode. So, and of course, the sanctions choking off the Iranians. And, they hoped that the sanctions, the previous bombing, the protests that they stirred up in an attempted colour revolution would basically cause the Iranian country to fall apart. But the authorities responded cleverly by restricting internet use so that the rebels, backed by the CIA and Mossad, couldn't organise coherently and managed to put it all down. Anyway, the US, of course, wants to install a puppet regime, probably under the dictatorship of Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah. I mentioned that the interview on Late Night Live with David Marr and an academic the other day failed to disclose that the academic was related to the late Shah's cousin or something like that. And the number of sort of expat Iranians who are coming out cheering for the bombing and destruction of their home country and the reinstatement of the Shah, just because people have some vague connection or even close connection to a country and they are expats, they are not necessarily knowledgeable about everything that's going on with that country. They're not necessarily unbiased. And just like Machado and Guaido, whatever his name was in Venezuela, who are traitors to their country, wanting the US to bomb their country and take it over. The same with a number of these expat Iranians running around. It's not good enough to say, oh, I used to live in Iran and this is what I think and therefore I know everything and this is what the people of Iran want. The truth, dear listener, would be this, from my readings, I might be completely wrong, but I reckon I'm closer than most, is that for your average Iranian, they would not like living under a theocracy and they would not be happy with the lack of liberties and they would not be happy with the economy. And no doubt the Iranian authorities have made plenty of mistakes in trying to deal with the sanctions that have been imposed on them and the allocation of resources and all the rest of it. But these are not stupid people. They are educated and they can look around the rest of the Middle East and see Afghanistan, see Libya, see Syria, see Iraq. All of these places where the US supposedly came in to install freedom, and they know that those countries are a basket case. And these people, I reckon, the majority would say, yep, things are bad under this theocracy, but they'd be a damn sight worse under the chaos of the US overthrowing their government and installing whoever the US wants. If anybody out there is stupid enough to think that the Americans would be installing successfully a genuine democracy in Iran, then I've got a bridge to sell you. So the average Iranian is stuck between a rock and a hard place. And while you might see a street march in Sydney or New York with a few expat Iranians chanting and singing and dancing because of the death of the supreme leader, you can see similar footage in Iran of hundreds of thousands of people mourning the loss of the supreme leader and supporting the government because their country's been bombed by America. So guess what? They're not really well disposed to America. that kind of is what happens. And they know that the Israelis would be in there as well. So when you've lost loved ones, property, suffered at the hands of these people, the idea that you would welcome them in to install their brand of freedom, completely ludicrous. And to think, oh, it's different this time compared to the others. No, it's not. I watched a clip with, what's his name? Sam, can't remember his last name now. Oh, I used to like him. He's completely delusional, thinking that, Sam Harris, thinking that, oh, it'll be different this time. The Iranians actually do want democracy, and it's actually painful, but it'll be worth the experiment. For fuck's sake. Anyway, I've digressed. So anyway, we Australia are supporting the Americans and the Israelis. We have not condemned them, and we're part of the lawless imperialist project that's going on in this world, and someone's got to stop us at some point. I saw a guy getting interviewed, and I thought he made a really good comment about the situation. Dr. Fouad Izzadi. Let me try and bring up what he had to say, and I'll play that for you now. Give my voice a break.
Where do you see this going? Is there an off-ramp for Iran?
I think what will happen is that even if the United States is able to kill illegally Iranian leaders, the next generation of Iranians, the Iranians that did not see American atrocities in Iran before 1979, some Iranians that did not understand why their parents and grandparents were anti-American, those Iranians will take over. Now they understand why American government is an imperialist, vicious government, and a government that attacks other countries and kills little children. They understand they're fighting the Epstein class that either rape little girls or bomb little girls. This is the government that we are witnessing. They're going to fight back against that government, and they're going to ensure that the Islamic Republic of Iran will live many years after America destroys itself.
It's true. I mean, if you were in Iran and your family was being bombed and your family and friends were being killed and injured, you'd be highly motivated, wouldn't you? I know I would be. I'd be seeking revenge. That's what I'd be seeking. And, you know, what this sows in terms of the future is just a disaster for the rest of the world and for Iran. Everybody. It's a mess. Meanwhile, of course, we wander the streets here in Australia looking for our next cup of coffee and croissant and not in the least bit worried about it, but I'll get on to that. Laura Tingle wrote an article, ABC. I was critical of Laura Tingle when she was political reporter, in that I thought she was fairly weak and used to get all these great reviews from people. She's now some sort of foreign affairs reporter, and she wrote in her article, one of the most perplexing acts of apparent self-harm undertaken by the besieged regime in Iran since Saturday has been the decision to attack non-military targets in its neighbouring countries in the Gulf. Honestly, Laura, they've been attacking military targets, and it's not perplexing. It makes sense. So she had on the record somebody from the United Arab Emirates saying that Iran's Gulf attacks had isolated the country, and he warned Tehran not to target its neighbours, saying the Iranian aggression against the Gulf states was a miscalculation and it isolated Iran at a critical juncture. Your war is not with your neighbours. Return to reason, to your surroundings, and deal with your neighbours rationally and responsibly before the circle of isolation and escalation, blah, blah. Your war is not with your neighbours. Well, if your neighbours are harbouring US military bases from which missiles and planes are leaving, and the people organising that shit are living in front of computer screens, then yeah, like that's part of the problem. That's part of our problem with Pine Gap. If there is ever a war with China, with the US, and Pine Gap gets bombed by, say, China, for example, well, we've got no one to blame because that's an essential piece of infrastructure of US sitting on our land. What would you expect them to do? Anyway, Penny Wong, Australia condemns Iran's reckless attacks, including against civilians and civilian infrastructure. She lists the Arab states that have been affected and says, I'm engaging with my counterparts in the region to express Australia's solidarity and support. France, Germany and the UK issued a statement condemning Iran's disproportionate response. And as commentator Jason Hickel says, I want to know what they think is a proportionate response when invaders assassinate your head of state and civilian leaders in an explicit campaign to destroy your government. Yeah. In the joint statement, France, Germany, United Kingdom urged the Iranian regime to end Iran's nuclear program. Well, last year we were told that it was completely obliterated. They're telling Iran to curb its ballistic missile program, as if when you've just been bombed like they have, that you would make yourself even more defenseless. And cease the appalling violence and repression against its own people. Again, up for discussion as to how much was done by the authorities in Iran and how much was done by instigators of a colour revolution, the type of which has been documented multiple times around the world. They said there at the end of their statement, this is the European guys, we condemn Iranian attacks on countries in the region in the strongest terms. Iran must refrain from indiscriminate military strikes. We call for a resumption of negotiations. Why would they? And urge the Iranian leadership to seek a negotiated solution. Well, which ones? They keep killing them. Like the Iranian leadership changes daily because these people are bombing them and assassinating them. Ultimately, the Iranian people must be allowed to determine their future. This guy, Tom London, commented on Twitter, European leaders on international law in 2026. Genocide in Gaza? Okay. Kidnap Maduro? Okay. Invade Greenland? No, it's against international law. Illegally attack Iran? Yeah, that's okay. It's just despicable and contemptible. Yeah. Still on this incredulity that Iran would counterattack, I'll play a little clip. This one, MSNBC reporter, and the official is the Iranian foreign minister. So let's just see how this little bit transpired. Here we go.
Sir, if that's a red line for you, why is attacking U.S. military bases abroad justified?
But because they are attacking us. They are U.S. military, installations, facilities, bases who are attacking us. We are under attack. Why don't you, recognize this fact? We are under the attack by U.S. by U.S. forces in the region. So we have every right to defend ourselves. And how to defend ourselves? We attacked, the U.S. bases. This is obvious. This is a very simple fact, and I hope.
He was almost shocked, wasn't he? Well, I don't know. It's just, you're kidding me. I have to explain this? Really? That's kind of what his reaction was. So, it's such an Orwellian world we live in. Hegseth, what's he? Secretary of War. He's quoted as saying, "We didn't start this war, but under President Trump, we are finishing it." Of course you started this war. What we need, of course, in times like this, dear listener, is a strong UN Security Council. And let's just zip over and see who's in control, who's chairing the meeting of the UN Security Council at the moment. Actually, it doesn't look like a politician as such, but she does look familiar. You might detect by her accent who she is, but this is her chairing the UN Security Council meeting.
Good afternoon. The 10,113 meeting of the Security Council is called to order.
Well, if you're just listening to the audio, then can you pick that voice, dear listener? I'm tempted to give you 3 guesses. I mean, it could have been some European leader with a strong accent, or it could have been Melania Trump. Yep. I mean, this is where we are at. People joke about banana republics and North Korea as having family members positioned into important places. I just mentioned Jared Kushner negotiating with the Iranians over their nuclear deal, and we've got Melania Trump chairing a UN Security Council meeting. I'm not kidding. So the US currently holds the presidency of the council, and that's who Trump chose as the chair, which has shades of Caligula to it, the Roman Empire who put Roman emperor who put a horse in the Senate, and it's got a little bit of that, hasn't it? So, the other day we were talking about the Melania movie, the documentary, and I mentioned some scathing reviews. I found some more. I'll just divert. So from IndieWire, this is reviews of the Melania documentary. From IndieWire, if syphilis were a movie. From Variety, I can't understand a fucking thing she says. Actually, I don't know if these are true. These probably aren't, but these are probably made up. I should have checked the rest. Now that I'm reading them, but they are funny anyway. Hollywood Reporter, she should be considered a war crime. New York Times, like being taken hostage by the Taliban. Roger Ebert, watching Melania's journey from Slovenian prostitute to First Lady is like walking barefoot in a field of Lego while you have explosive diarrhea. And from Screen, if Epstein really did kill himself, watching this film may have been why. They had to be made up, don't they? And of course, Epstein killed himself before the movie came out, but maybe he just did that because he knew it was coming. And did Epstein kill himself? Probably not. If after all this fiasco, Trump orders some sort of invasion of Greenland, then Denmark will get no sympathy from me because Denmark just failed to condemn the unprovoked US-Israeli attack on Iran in the UN Security Council. So if not Iran, why not Greenland? I'm kind of coming around to the view that I hope he has a crack at Greenland because they're so spineless that they deserve a bit of heat. That's where I've reached, dear listener. Back to my notes. Iran, why? Why now? Why do it? It's not about nuclear weapons threat. And it's not about freedom and restoring freedom for the poor people of Iran. We know that. Everybody knows that. I see it as four things coming together. You've got the military-industrial complex. For them, wars are great because when you drop bombs, you have to buy more weapons and bombs from them, so they get to sell more. So wars are good because it uses up ammunition, equipment. The military-industrial complex, therefore, has to supply and make money. The second reason is the Israeli Zionists obviously want to take over the Middle East, and Iran has been on their hit list for a long time. The third reason is just general capitalists who are seeking opportunities to make money by this exercise after the war is concluded. Or, so, for example, taking over the Iranian oil fields, taking over whatever other natural resources might be there. Wendy's and McDonald's swinging in and starting to operate fast food joints in there. All of that sort of stuff. So you've got the military-industrial complex, you've got Israeli Zionists, you've got just general greedy capitalists, and then we've got propaganda that's been controlled by these three forces that's misdirecting our empathy. And so people will be sympathizing with the poor Israelis because we get lots of pictures of victims of bombing there without any of the victims of Gaza and Iran being shown. So yeah, the propaganda, the painting of the evil regime, whereas we're the good guys, they're the bad guys, blah blah blah. So unfortunately, Zionist interests line up with the military-industrial complex and just your average capitalists, and they also line up with Christian nutters who want to bring on the rapture. And for them, they see the rise of Israel and as being an essential component before the second coming of Jesus and the rapture, where they all get to go up to heaven. And so anything that facilitates that is good. So yeah, those groups collectively control our media and our culture, and they can then manufacture our consent to it. So that's where we get to the interesting part in just having a look at Anthony Albanese, in that understanding him is kind of a key to understanding what a pickle we are in. Like, pickle's a fairly gentle word. It should be something much stronger, but we'll just use pickle for the moment. So I'm going to go on with a few things about what he's been saying, but I feel I should tell you what he said originally, and I've just got to find this. What I'm going to do actually is I'll play this clip from Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, who are conservative commentators with the podcast, and they're talking about the reactions around the world, and then they refer to Anthony Albanese. So I'll do that because that'll give me a chance just to find this section that I want to get to in my notes. So let me go to that and play these guys, and I'll scoot around my notes while that's happening.
Of the United Nations, or indeed his allies. It's not clear to me how many others. I was reading Der Spiegel this morning. They said Merz had been informed. Now, Merz is due to go to Washington this week. I don't know whether the Brits were informed. I don't know whether I just don't know. But I don't know. Have you seen anybody outside the kind of really obvious ones, like Israel? Have you seen anybody openly endorse this so far? It's interesting.
Yeah, Anthony Albanese.
Okay.
So it's been really interesting. I mean, I was just noting down a little bit of this stuff. you get the full range. On the one hand, you have Jeremy Corbyn coming out saying, as you can imagine, this is illegal, unprovoked, unjustifiable. These are rogue states breaking international law, right? So that's the classic position of the European left. And then on the other extreme, you've got Anthony Albanese. And Anthony Albanese says, Australia stands with the brave people of Iran in their struggle against oppression. And then it talks about the Iranian regime's ballistic missile and nuclear programs, support for armed proxies, brutal acts of violence and intimidation, attacks on Australian soil, human rights. And it then says, we support the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. We're closely monitoring the situation. We're upgrading travel advice. But it's the closest, but compared to the other world leaders. It's a pretty full-throated, condemn Iran, we support the US. And there's
That's a good summary of it, comparing him to the others. Now, as I'm about to go through a bit more specifically about what he said, but there was a good article in Crikey by Bernard Keane, which said the title of it was Anthony Albanese's transformation into Deputy Sheriff John Howard is complete. And in it, he says that Albanese's response to the Iranian attack on Iran at this moment, he says, it's a far cry from Albanese's own position on the Iraq invasion 23 years ago. In a speech in early 2003, Albanese said, and I'm about to quote it, quote, there is no UN mandate here. We are not bringing peace. We are invading a sovereign country and making war. This is an unjust war without UN backing. Our government is about to redefine us in the eyes of the world as willing backers of US militarism. What does that say about the sort of nation that we are? We are a multicultural nation, and yet here we are sending a message, particularly to the Islamic world, that we are part of the old white Anglo-Christian order, and we have the President of the United States who invokes God in defending his government's actions. So that's what Albanese said in 2003 compared to what he's saying today about the attacks. So in his statement, you heard from the commentator there, Roy Stewart, about some of the stuff there, but in his official statement, we support the United States acting to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. That's been done. And to prevent Iran continuing to threaten international peace and security. What threat do they have compared to Israel, for example, who was bombing all of its neighbouring countries continuously? Other parts of the statement. A regime that relies on the repression and murder of its own people to retain power is without legitimacy. That just is an excuse for the West to just go in and bomb the shit out of them. Let me just see. He says another thing here about, for decades, this is Anthony Albanese in his statement, for decades the Iranian regime has been a destabilising force through its ballistic missile and nuclear programs, support for armed proxies, and brutal acts of violence and intimidation. Iran directed at least 2 attacks on Australian soil in 2024. These appalling acts targeting Australia's Jewish community were intended to create fear, divide our society, and challenge our sovereignty. In response, Australia took the unprecedented steps of expelling Iran's ambassador, suspending operations at our embassy in Tehran, blah, blah, blah. So ASIO came out with that without any proof no proof has come forward about that at all. And let me just find the relevant part here. So, as Mary Kostakidis says, the PM has persisted in blaming Iran when senior police at a press conference stated they have no evidence, and the Minister for Police and Counterterrorism also denied it. In the New South Wales Parliament, there were questions on notice which said that basically there was no proof of Iranian involvement in the New South Wales case. And just another section here from Mary Kostakidis. So here is a report that she links to, specifically about those two attacks, one of which was in Melbourne, the Adas Synagogue, and the other in Sydney, Lewis Continental Kitchens. Either due to location or timing, neither may be captured in the police or Prime Minister's responses above, or the police or ministerial responses above. This is the part in the New South Wales Parliament saying we don't have any knowledge of it, of Iranian involvement. She goes on, but we have seen or heard of no evidence that Iran was involved. It is all on intel, presumably provided via Mossad. Note the claim is at least two. Why so when all the others were accounted for? So she's saying we just have to take Asio's Burgess word for it. And she says what was particularly odd was that Iran had the intel and the people on the ground to carry out an attack on a synagogue, and they just happened to choose one that is non-Zionist, a Haredi congregation, which opposes the formation of the State of Israel. So dear listener, do you really think if Iran was coming here to destabilise our country, to attack a Jewish or Israeli institution, and go to all that effort, then the particular synagogue they would choose would be one of the rare ones that was actually non-Zionist? So Albanese is relying on that, but there's absolutely no proof has been offered to us about that. So the Greens' response, Scott, you should enjoy this. Another reason to vote Green. David Shoebridge says, Australia's support of Trump and Netanyahu's illegal attack is disgraceful. We cannot bomb our way to peace. The Albanese Labor government must immediately rule out any Australian support for this escalation. No resources, no intelligence. Meanwhile, Tim Wilson of the Liberals, that the Greens oppose the United States and Israel ending a regime that brutally subjugates women, murders homosexuals, and exports terrorism tells you everything about their priorities. So back to Albanese. So according to the Bernard Keane article, Albanese said, we've long recognised that Iran's nuclear program is a threat to global peace and security. It went on with that part. Albanese, meanwhile, clearly has no interest in international law when it might restrict Western countries. Questioned about the legality of the attack on Iran, Albanese said, those judgments and statements are for the United States and for those involved directly in the attack. What I would say is that the threat to international peace and security of the Iranian regime is real. So, asked if it's legal what has been done, not for me to say, he says. But gee, those Iranians are bad guys. It's essentially what he's saying. Condemning that, and at the same time, all sorts of other atrocities committed by the Israelis remain uncondemned. And now he endorses the bombing of Muslim countries in the name of freedom, with scant regard to international law. he has enthusiastically adopted Howard's deputy sheriff support for the United States military. What else have I got here? I'll just scoot down a little bit further. So, you know, Albanese, when you look at those words from 2003, he understood, he got it. And somehow, 23 years later, here we are, where he, amongst Western leaders, is one of the biggest cheerleaders for this shit. How do we get into this position? So it's just a capture of our society, isn't it? This isn't about Trump. But Labor and Liberals, Nationals, they all agree on this. Republicans and Democrats agree with this. The only problem the Democrats have is that they're not opposed, as Chris Hedges says, Democratic Party leaders are not opposed to attacking Iran. They're opposed to attacking Iran without being consulted. So in the State of the Union address, 24 Democrats leapt to their feet and applauded every time Trump threatened Iran or lauded Israel. So we've just got this problem where the Israeli lobby is way too strong. There's a couple of different things that you could look at, dear listener, that I haven't seen yet, but there's a 4-part series called The Lobby, which Israel and its supporters blocked from being broadcast. Pirated copies can be watched on the website Electronic Intifada. So in it, the leaders of the Israel lobby are captured on a reporter's hidden camera explaining how, backed by the intelligence services in Israel, they discredit and silence American critics and use cash donations to control the American electoral process and political system. And Israel's death grip on the American political system is also documented in The Israel Lobby and the US Foreign Policy by John Mearsheimer and Stephen Walt. And in it he says, Chris Hedges goes on, if you wander off the reservation and become critical of Israel, you not only will not get money, AIPAC will go to great lengths to find someone who will run against you. That's what Mearsheimer said. And they'll support that person very generously. And the end result is you're likely to lose your seat in Congress. Surely similar things must be happening here in Australia in terms of influence and donations. What a disappointment Albanese is becoming. Punching down on the ISIS brides, calling Grace Tang difficult. I love the response by Grace and other feminists by saying, being called difficult is a badge of honour. In amongst all the difficulties in this world, he thought it important to call for the former Prince Andrew to be denied succession rights in the unlikely event that 7 other people die and Prince Andrew's in line for the throne. This sort of shenanigans that he's getting involved with. How is he different to ScoMo, Tony Abbott, Dutton, Howard? He's fitting right into the mould of those guys. I think this has to show in the polls next election. Commentator on Twitter, Joanna Davis, said, never thought I'd see this, but it's true. The reason Albo is now hated even more than Scott Morrison and John Howard is because we already knew they were bastards. We expected better of Albo. We put our faith in him to undo their damage. It was his mandate and he betrayed it. And it's true. Another commentator says, oh my God statement from Albo is excruciating. He basically blamed Iran for the attack on its own country by America and Israel. Albo, you are finished now. You will lose your seat and be forever known as America and Israel's fuck buddy. You have become the most hated Australian PM. Yeah. John Menadue, the John Menadue blog, by the way, Pearls and Irritations, essential reading for anybody interested in News and Politics and Sex and Religion in Australia. He wrote a good article about leadership, and I've got an excerpt from it on John Menadue on leadership. He says, Australia's political culture mistakes authority, comfort and continuity for leadership without the courage to create disequilibrium and confront hard choices. Real reform remains impossible. Leadership is a set of activities in which the group, small or large, corporate, government, religious or social, is persuaded to make necessary but difficult and painful changes. Some will be disadvantaged. That fact must be faced. It is about asking the hard questions and pursuing them until a resolution is found. It requires disequilibrium to force us outside our comfort zone. Change and reform does not occur in comfort zones. Vested interests, whether in business, politics, media or church, will invariably oppose change to maintain their power and privileges. They want to keep us comfortable with the status quo. Good leaders guide the process and do not stipulate the result in advance. Will Jim Chalmers set out that if we want to maintain existing or improve public services, we will have to increase taxes? What about a wealth tax? Actually, that was in relation to something else. Ignore that part. The test of good leadership is to achieve a difficult outcome in which the group can, in the end, claim we did it ourselves, that it wasn't imposed by a strong or charismatic leader. Ownership of the problem and the solution by the group is essential. In Australia, we have an abundance of people with authority in politics, media, universities and churches, but leaders are in short supply. Some courage would also help. Anthony Albanese in this episode, this is me now, has displayed zero courage, zero leadership. Incredibly disappointing. And the way that he has been captured by the system, by all those influences I mentioned earlier, and isn't even a shadow of what he was in 2003, is really instructive for us. And so it's not so much about finding the right people and getting them into positions of power to make the right choices and do the right things. The other part of all that is constructing our institutions and protecting them and the people in them so that when they're in there, they don't get captured by the lobbying forces and changed in the way that Albanese has been changed. And I just don't know how we would go about doing that. If you're ever in the business, dear listener, of setting up an institution, if you can come up with a fail-safe formula, call it, if you like, the Albanese protection mechanism, so that our leaders are not captured and transferred into supporting existing power structures the way Albanese has. Maybe next week, in between now and then, I'll try and think of how would you construct a system to guard against that. Anyway, there we go. That's the latest. Talk to you next week. Bye for now.